There's an old Chinese proverb that I wanted to share. It's a story about a farmer and his son, and they had a horse that was really important to the family. It was a beloved horse, and it helped them work and farm in the fields. And one day, the horse ran away. The neighbor said to the farmer, "What bad luck you have." And the farmer replied, "Maybe yes, maybe no. We'll see." Few days later, that horse actually returned and not only came back, but brought with it several wild horses. So this poor farmer had now not one horse, but a whole group of them. And the neighbor said, "What great luck you have." And the farmer said, "Maybe yes, maybe no, we'll see." A couple of weeks after that, when his son was working with the new horses, trying to train them, he was thrown from one of them and he broke his leg. What happens? The neighbors say, "What bad luck you have." And the farmer says, "Maybe yes, maybe no, we'll see." A few weeks after that, the army comes. They need more soldiers. And they take all the young men from the village except the farmer's son because his leg was broken. The neighbors say, "What great luck you have." And the farmer says, "Maybe yes, maybe no, we'll see." It's an interesting proverb. And it has in it what I think is an important lesson. Sometimes we're too quick to judge the good or the bad of a situation. Sometimes we don't wait for time and perspective to see what happens next. We let the moment define us and what we think the possibilities of our future are. It's hard to know with certainty what the future is going to hold. I know personally in my own life, I've had many moments that I thought were not great ones. And I look back on them, and what I thought was a bad moment was actually a really lucky one that such and such happened. Right? The most obvious example that comes to my mind is 5 years ago when I was graduating rabbinical school. I didn't have an intention of coming to Canada. There was a job that I really, really wanted, and somebody else got it. And I wasn't very happy that I didn't get the job. I was happy for a friend that did get it, but I was not very happy that I didn't get it. And when the opportunity came to come to Canada, I thought, I'll be there for a couple of years, and then I'll move back to somewhere nice and warm in the southwestern United States. I came to Canada. I fell in love with the city. I met my wife and fell in love with her. We have a daughter. I have an opportunity now with a new job and a new synagogue that I'm very, very excited for. And I look back, and me not getting that job was a good thing. My life would be radically different from what it is today, and all I know is that what I have today makes me incredibly happy. But at the moment, I didn't know that. I didn't have the farmer's wisdom. I thought, what bad luck? Not. Maybe yes, maybe no. We'll see. And it's one of the problems we have in our world. We so often focus on the negative. And the news seems to be a never-ending cycle of one tragedy after another. It's the 24/7 news cycle. Crime, poverty, illness, hate, war. It's just one bad thing after the next, and then the news moves on to the next bad thing. The problem is the news cycle leaves out what happens next. It moves too fast to tell us about the people that acted after a tragedy, the neighbors who came together to support a family in need, the people who stood up against hatred, or the community that supported each other in a moment of loss and pain, the people who through their actions offered a blessing where there was a curse. A teacher of mine would often say that God is not in the fire, but the firefighters, those who rush into a burning building to save others. God's not in the cancer, but in the doctors and the nurses that care for those we love. God is in the community that rallies around and supports a family facing a crisis. And the answer then is, the question is, what makes something a blessing or a curse? And the answer is, it's not the event. It's what happens next. What do we do next? And this happens on things like not getting a job we want, rather trivial in the grand scheme of life. It happens on the large scale with societies, nations, communities. It happens on the micro level with people and relationships. There's a psychotherapist, Esther Perel. She's well known and has made a career out of counseling families and relationships, couples, that have a traumatic event. Oftentimes it's infidelity. And what's unique, however, is that she often helps them to reframe what happened as a wake-up call, as a sign that something in their relationship wasn't right. And it doesn't mean that the relationship is forever broken, but it's something that can be built off of. And she's made an incredibly successful career out of it, helping couples to use these traumatic moments as a stepping stone to becoming closer, becoming more connected with each other. And obviously, it's not that infidelity is a good thing or that a traumatic event in a relationship is something that we want. But things happen in life. Bad things happen in life. And the lesson I think we can learn from what she does is ask that question. What do we do next? Do we let that moment define us? Or do we do something with it? And part of what makes her so successful is her story. Perel's the daughter of survivors. And she credits her work to her experience growing up in the shadow of the Shoah, growing up amongst her parents and their friends, a community of those who survived. And as a child, she said she saw two types of people. There were those who didn't die, and there were those who came back to life. There were some who were stuck in the horrors, understandably, of what they faced, unable to move past them. But there were others, like her parents, that lost everything and still were able to love again, were able to rebuild their lives, their families, build communities, were able to be happy again. And it's an extreme example I've given you now from both ends of the spectrum, the trivial to the extreme. But the lesson works for everything in between. We all have personal trials in our life. We all have passed moments of pain, moments of tragedy, moments that we've suffered. And the question then is, do we let those moments define us? Do we let those moments define us, or do we do something with them to build something new? And that's the lesson from our parsha this week. In chapter 23, verse 6, the Torah reminds us of the time that Balaam tried to curse the Jewish people, and instead, what happens? He offers a blessing. He tells us the Lord turned this curse into a blessing. So now we have a different image. We have the Zen-like proverb. Maybe yes, maybe no, we'll see. We sit and we wait. We have this version where God is the one that turns our curses into blessings. When we look into rabbinic literature, that's only part of the story. There's more to it. Because we don't sit back like the farmer and wait to see what happens. We don't wait for God to turn our tragedies into something to grow out of, or our curses into blessings. The Jewish answer isn't to sit back and wait. It's to transform a curse into a blessing ourselves. You don't have to look back in your Chumash, but you're welcome to if you want to. On page 669 and 670, there's two very similar verses. Chapter 22, verse 5, and then verse 11. And the English translation of them is very similar. And the Hebrew is very similar, but the English translation doesn't quite capture what's actually there in the Hebrew. The very first verse is from Balak. And he talks about the Israelites, the nation that came out of Egypt. Hinei ha'am yatsa mimitzrayim. Hinei ha'am yatsa mimitzrayim. But later, in verse 11, it's Bilam who says, Hinei ha'am hayotzeh mimitzrayim. Just a slight difference in the Hebrew. And both times in our Chumash, it translates it as the people that came out. But the Hebrew really for the first one is the people who came out of Egypt. And the second time are the people who are coming out of Egypt. It's not done yet. It's an ongoing process. They are still, all these years after the Exodus, all these years in the wilderness of the desert, They are still the people who are coming out of Egypt. Their past isn't something that's set in stone and defines them. It's an evolving process of who they're becoming. And that's what the Hasidic commentary on this verse notes. To the king who inhabits the physical world, it's binary, yes or no. They are in Egypt or they are out of Egypt. But to the prophet, it's a different question. He sees the spiritual side of it. The people who are still coming out of Egypt. They physically left, but they're still on their spiritual journey, moving from slavery to freedom, from tragedy to redemption. And that's the Jewish lesson, is that our past doesn't define us. Tonight we begin the 17th of Tammuz. To call it a holiday is the wrong word. It's a commemoration, a remembrance of when the Romans broke through the walls of Jerusalem and laid siege. And in 3 weeks on Tisha B'Av, we remember when they destroyed our holy temple. And throughout Jewish history, we can look at example after example of when our institutions were razed and they were burned to the ground, when our people were slaughtered, when our people were pushed out of their homes, forced to flee with nothing, from one country to the next and one time period to the next. Well, what was the Jewish answer? The temple was destroyed. We built synagogues. We couldn't offer sacrifices. We turned to prayer. We turned to the rabbinic literature. Our Judaism became something that didn't happen just in Jerusalem, but it happened in our homes, in our communities, with our families, with ourselves. They built something new. And so that's the question I want us to think about. What today are we building? As we come out of the pandemic, out of 2 years that have been incredibly difficult. I know firsthand, my family in Los Angeles, for almost 2 years, I couldn't see my parents or my siblings. They couldn't attend our wedding. Being separated from family and friends is difficult. And I know there are many people that suffered even more, whether economically with their jobs, or people who lost someone they love. It's been a very difficult 2 years. But the question is now, not is the pandemic over or not, but as we come out of it, as we are coming out of it, what are we doing with it? Will we treasure our time more with our friends and our loved ones because of all the time we are forced to spend apart? Are we going to from now on recognize how our choices impact not just ourselves, but those around us locally in our community and those globally around the world? Are we going to learn that lesson of how connected the global world really is? As the shul comes out of the pandemic, we have to ask ourselves that question as well. What is the next chapter of Beth Torah? What is the next chapter of blessing that we are writing? Synagogues all around North America are struggling now after the pandemic, bringing people back in, restarting programs that for 2 years have stopped entirely. I've heard from so many of you how much you want the choir back. You love the choir. I've heard from others how much they miss the Hebrew school, the religious school. They want to see that coming back. And so many other programs and activities that defined Beth Torah as one of the leading Jewish institutions here in Canada. And we can look at the last 2 years that wiped all of this out as a curse. Or we can look for the blessing as together we rebuild. We write that next chapter. We take these programs and we make them even better, even greater. So that's the question I want us to think about. Not the sit-back Zen-likeness of the Chinese proverb. Maybe yes, maybe no, we'll see. But I'm asking you, our tradition is asking you, that you join me, that together we take the future into our own hands, that we work together, that we transform the past, the tragedy, the suffering, the difficulties, the curse, that we use whatever we have, and together we build a blessing. Shabbat Shalom.